So I'm here today to talk about former Secretary of State and 2016 presidential candidate Hillary Clinton. So she delivered some really curious remarks during a recent episode of her podcast, and I had no idea that she had a podcast, but here's what she said. She said, quote, "A lot of young people are leaving the church in part because of the way they understand what Christianity has become. So judgmental, so alienating that they think to themselves, well, I don't need that." So it's interesting, when you think about that quote, it seems like for at least some of the people leaving churches, Hillary is saying it's about the perceived judgment, right? And don't get me wrong, self-professed Christians are human beings and in turn can be sinful and judgmental just like anyone else, right? And this, of course, can infest and infect churches. But let's not get it twisted. People are leaving churches for a lot of different reasons, and one of them is the sad and tragic manifestation among many progressive Christians of a theological worldview that really just flows like the wind, right? It's a scenario in which people have become the arbiters of their own truth. And I would ask you, what is the point of being part of a church that talks and acts like the rest of the world? There are so many people today who profess to be Christians, who flow with the cultural waves, who don't at least publicly, stand on the totality of biblical truth. And these are people who encourage others to follow emotions rather than God's standards for our lives. This is an ideology that has infested every part of our culture, and unfortunately that includes the church. Now, these are lies that have been bought and sold and perpetuated through the media, through Hollywood, and through educational institutions, and it's become really the lifeblood of modern culture here in America. We've become self-obsessed people who are really just driven by what we think and feel, by our own whims. And we see this in study after study, particularly when it comes to the Christian faith. So many people have turned Christianity into something that barely resembles the biblical sentiments it's intended to be based on. Researcher George Barna recently said that there was a Reformation underway, and that, quote, "The theology of the Reformation is being driven by American culture rather than biblical truth." In a recent study, he saw 40% of Christians, and this is crazy, accepting lying as being morally permissible as long as it advances the interests of a person or protects their reputation. Other studies have shown majorities of Americans saying bizarre and relativistic things about truth being based on individual opinions, and it's just crazy. There was one area, though, where Hillary Clinton and I agreed, and that's on Jesus and justice, or as I like to refer to it, loving others. Christ called us to two important things, two commandments: love God, His standards, moral truth, His very being, and love our fellow man. So she said, quote, "To say that Jesus and justice are the same thing seems to me to be obvious. How can you be a Bible-reading person, a church-attending person, and not understand how profoundly true that simple phrase really is?" Yes, Secretary Clinton, it is precisely this reality that calls many of us to defend the unborn, to seek justice on their behalf. Isn't that justice? When the Bible tells us very clearly that the unborn are alive, that they were created by the Almighty. It's crazy because some people might leave church because of judgment, but many people, and far more people today, are leaving or are never joining because too many of us have allowed churches to become counterfeit cultural institutions that sell the very lie about morality and truth that is already freely being doled out on TV, in movies, and in every other educational vein. How do we fix this? We fix it by clinging to truth. When the Bible tells us unborn babies are alive, we believe it. We don't cling to our emotions. We don't cling to our feelings. We don't lie to make ourselves feel better. And there are so many other issues that this matters for. But we cling to authenticity, and we look to God because faith is about Him. And it's about how He changes us. It's not about how we feel and we try to mold God around that. That's not what it is.